Hello, everyone, and welcome to our May Twin Ports Climate Conversations. My name is Madison Rodman, and I am an Extension Educator with Minnesota Sea Grant. I'm glad you're all joining us here today. We have an exciting conversation today. We'll be hearing from three speakers. The first will be Chris Liljeblad, the Senior Transportation Planner from the City of Duluth. Next, we'll hear from Paul Hellstrom, Customer Programs Representative at Minnesota Power. And lastly, we'll hear from Alita Johnson, who's the Director of Information Technology and Sustainability Coordinator with the Duluth Transit Authority. There are many individuals involved with helping Twin Ports climate conversations happen each month. And those include representatives from the organizations you see here on the screen, including Minnesota Sea Grant, Wisconsin Sea Grant, the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, the 1854 Treaty Authority, Minnesota's Lake Superior Coastal Program at Minnesota DNR, and NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. Twin Ports climate conversations have a mission of aiming to improve climate conversation communication skills for all, improving data collection and sharing, motivation, and supporting community-based adaptation practices, and increasing the climate change conversation in more sectors to broaden our impact. I want you to know today's webinar will be recorded and posted on our Minnesota Sea Grant page, and I will be sharing a URL in just a moment to the chat pod. We invite you to submit questions throughout today's webinar using that chat box, and feel free to submit them at any point. We'll be pausing briefly between each speaker to take a question with a longer Q&A at the end. Again, remember this will be recorded, so if you have colleagues or others that are interested in this topic, feel free to send them the link as well. So today's panel will be the first of two Twin Port climate conversations focusing on transportation. This month, we're focusing on motorized vehicles, sustainability, infrastructure, and progress. And next month, we'll be focusing on non-motorized vehicles and pedestrian bike infrastructure. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who will be Chris Liljeblad, and he will be speaking for about 12 minutes, and then we'll take one quick question. So I'm going to stop screen sharing, Chris, and I'll let you share your slides.
Excellent.
Welcome.
Okay, well, let me get organized here. Oops, go to single screen. Okay.
Perfect.
Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you're handling this social distancing okay. What I'm going to cover is kind of a broad sweep of City of Duluth activities here, and I'm not going to spend undue time on any one part of this, but I'm going to talk very briefly about the city's comprehensive plan, talk mostly about modal situations in Duluth, the roadway infrastructure and how it's funded, parking supply, transit and freight. Really want to talk about vulnerable roadway users and safety. And then lastly, connected and automated vehicles, which is really a new and coming thing. To set the scene, really, I have to say that the Imagine Duluth 2035 plan was just adopted in 2018, and it was a couple-year effort to come up with this, and it, I think, represents pretty well framing for what I want to talk about, which is really that we are policy-wise committed to try and improve the function of our streets and roadways for all citizens, not just for the people who happen to be driving through. And that, you know, our policy framework is really to enhance multimodal options, to try and value community vitality, and then to try and recognize that we have a regional system, but there's an appropriate place for neighborhood emphasis and improving things that get to that. In terms of the travel throughout our Duluth Superior metropolitan area, this is the Metropolitan Interstate Council's framing of the commute mode share, and no surprise to anyone, driving alone is by far and away the major mode of travel to and from work. This would include education and other regular trips like that. It's fair to say that in sub areas like downtown Duluth, university campuses, and high frequency corridors, the share of transit and other modes is higher, but region-wide, it's pretty heavily emphasizing drive alone modes. Currently, of course, traffic volumes are way down, and a lot of people are walking and cycling for exercise, and that's all a good thing. I like to think that that kind of behavior will have a lasting effect, but at this point, that optimism, if you look at it historically over my career, I'd have to say it's unlikely that it's going to stay that way for very long. The roadway infrastructure in Duluth is, I have to say, this came really pretty directly out of our comprehensive planning process that's now a couple of years old, but in the outreach that was done as part of that plan, vast majority of people were very disgusted with the conditions of roadways in the city of Duluth. We have a 450-mile road network that was really built for a population that's 40% greater than our existing population. And that process of outreach really did enlighten policymakers about the extent of the problem. And it set the stage for the 0.5% sales tax that was passed by a 3-to-1 margin in 2018. It took a year to get the legislature on board to give the city authority to collect the tax. And this year in 2020 is the first year that that's really happening. So it's really kind of a punch in the gut that we went to all that trouble to collect that money, and now the sales tax is in the tank. So the expectation was that it would expand our infrastructure funding, our ability to do road improvements by a factor of about 2. And I've been involved in trying to prepare a 5- and 10-year plans to spend that money. And right now it's looking like the 5-year plan will work for 10 years until the economy recovers. Funding wise, over the 5-year CIP of the city, the city sales tax is far and away the biggest funder, if you will, on a regular basis of city discretionary funding for roadway improvements. Certainly we get funds from the Federal Highway Administration that are dedicated to particular projects that we usually have to compete for. We get just under $4 million a year in state aid and some other city funds. But the total effect there is something approaching $14 million a year. On the right side, on the bottom of this screen, I identified a number of, sort of standard costs of different construction types that the city has to spend. And you can see there, if we have to construct a couple of miles of street at $5 million a pop, our $13 million collection is all dedicated to one project. And when we have 450 miles of road to maintain, it doesn't go very far. So we're really challenged to find the money. Oh, let's see, there we go. Went a little too fast. Parking supply, a couple of important points here. I wanted to talk about parking in part because Sea-Grant was a funding contributor to the city a few years ago to revisit parking requirements and to reduce the amount of parking the city required as part of development. And that is something that happened. But as I've tried to highlight here in this image, we've got defunct parking garages downtown in Duluth that are taking up prime real estate and they're essentially not adding any vitality to downtown or any function for that matter. This is kind of a legacy of, an unfortunate legacy of trying to provide plentiful and cheap parking. And to that extent, I guess I want to emphasize Donald Shoup from the UC Berkeley is really far and away the guru, I think, in terms of parking cost. And just have to emphasize that parking is never free, even though it may seem that way. We all pay for it. And the average car is parked 95% of the time. And all that parking just takes away vitality from other important uses. So certainly this emphasizes the multimodality kind of needs that we need to move to in the future. To that extent, transit, I know Alita is on the call and she's going to be talking more about this later, so I don't want to say a lot about transit except that I grew to adulthood here in Duluth, and my wife and I's first house was on Jefferson Street and around 15th and 16th Avenue East. The patty cake shop was my regular bus stop, and I have to say we had a tremendous amount of company at that bus stop in the 1970s, and that's an unfortunate thing. We don't see nearly as much ridership as we could, and I really hope that we can find a way to return to more widespread household use of transit as a regular mode. One other point on the DTA is that the DTA is undertaking a transit-oriented development study of some of the parcels around their downtown transit center, with the idea of looking to how transit might be a bigger part of development in that area that would be more conducive to supporting transit. More housing, more types of uses that would contribute more ridership. On the port, I just have to say that it really is, to a large degree, our reason for being. And if you just look around from the High Bridge or Garfield Avenue and look at the movement of windmill parts or wind generator parts, it really requires a multimodal dance to move those parts out to our hinterland. And our service by 4 Class 1 railroads is a real important part of our port vitality. About vulnerable roadway users, very quickly, this left portion of your screen kind of shows the number of pedestrian deaths and how that's changed over time. And you see that the Great Recession and the 2008, 9, 10 period had, showed a dip in pedestrian fatalities. And that's unexpected. I mean, it is expected, I think, given that when there's greater activity on the roadways, we tend to see pedestrian fatalities go up. On the right side of the screen, the thing I want to emphasize is pedestrians shown in red. That highlights the likelihood of a pedestrian fatality related to travel speed. And your chance of being killed if you have a collision with a car are about 8 times greater with that 20-mile-per-hour increase in speed. And this is the kind of thing that helps inform our attempts at the city to move to a more livable street environment. And speaking of that, of course, our pedestrian system in Duluth is in huge need of significant improvement. Starting with in winter, it's obvious that we as Duluthians are just not doing a very good job. This little lady is walking in the street because all the snow from the street is piled on the sidewalk and there is no path there. In fact, the business owners there had shoveled a path from the street to the FedEx drop box and stuff. So you had to go from this, it's sad. Anyway, the ADA transition plan this is a couple years old also, shows that underneath all that snow, we also have poor condition sidewalks, a lot of intersections without curb ramps, and bus stops that, are, if 26% are in good condition, that means, 74% are bad or not good. Lastly, on connected and automated vehicles, a couple of important points here. I'll talk a little more about the why pursuing this, but really the rationale for pursuing connected and automated vehicles is trying to get the human error out of our driving. 94% of serious crashes are due to human error. And this quote it's really a quote, a summary of the vision for 2062 by Randy McCourt, who's a transportation engineer that I have a lot of high regard for. This came from the April edition of the Institute of Transportation Engineers Journal. And he's the current international president. He basically was trying to illustrate how CAVs might really contribute to a significant reduction in deaths. And he was pointing out that there is existing technology now to determine whether a motorist is impaired or not before they even drive. Similarly, we could have interlocks so that the car won't move unless the seat belts are buckled. That the controls, autonomous controls, can avoid vehicle-to-vehicle collisions and vehicle-to-infrastructure collisions. And with these types of things incorporated within the next 40 years, we could eliminate about 90% of our fatalities. So the case for making these kinds of CAVs investments really are about safety, but also mobility and logistical costs and congestion. If you can picture trucks operating with uniform spacing, that could be a lot more efficient as well as safer. We have a lot of challenges to overcome, though. One of those is on the disruption side. The number of jobs at stake here is in the millions. An awful lot of people depend on driving jobs for their employment. And there's a lot of skeptics about just how valuable this kind of thing is. On the federal and state roles, just very briefly, the states really are the laboratory in this case. And for the most part, the federal government has been giving the states the leeway to do that. And it has resulted in some great advancements. I think the day is coming when nationwide we're going to need a more assertive federal role and reviewing the safety parts of this is probably the most critical one. I want to point out that the state of Minnesota is one of those states that has really taken an active role in CAV development. There is a new strategic plan that's not quite a year old yet that lays out 65 recommendations in these 9 identified focus areas. I'm not going to go through them, but it's a pretty logical, rational approach. And if those of you who are interested in it, you can find that pretty conveniently online. So you can dig into it further. To summarize, I just want to go back to this multimodality point here, that even though our streets have really been mostly emphasizing moving people in and out and through Duluth just as fast as they can go, we really recognize that we need to slow people down so that neighborhood people can safely cross the street, walk to the store, ride their bikes, and not get killed in the process. And, you know, I think we really have a lot of heavy lifting to do to make all that happen, especially since the money is tight. And with that, I'll open it for questions.
Thank you, Chris. So we do have time for one quick question before we go to Paul next. So this question comes from Justin, and he's wondering, there's been a seemingly groundswell of bicycle sales and new users stemming from our quarantine and COVID measures. And then maybe you can look into your crystal ball, and do you expect this uptick in use to stick after? You kind of hinted at that. And will it impact any plans or designs for additional bicycle facilities on our roadways?
That's a great question, and I think it's there's a lot of unknowns. I think that walking and biking has been growing in recent years, and I think it's partly due to you know, just the need for healthier living, you know, to gain exercise and to you know, just to get active. And I think it's a great thing. I think the city is interested in fostering that more. And to the extent that we can reallocate some of the existing space to accommodate it better, I think the city's on board with trying to get there. But you know, to the degree that politics are involved, you know, we have to count votes too. And what we need is advocates.
Thank you. So I'm going to pass the baton on to Paul, and Paul, you can take it away and share your screen.
Thank you very much for that. Is my screen up?
Yes.
Excellent. So hello, everybody. Paul Hellstrom here. Today I am working with Minnesota Power. I've been with the company about 6 years, and today just going to go over electric vehicles, some of the basics, and we will cover some of the stuff at Minnesota Power.
Paul, it seems like we maybe lost you for a second
No,
there.
I'm still here. I was just trying to unmute. I'm just holding the space bar on. It's fine. I can do that.
And we can't see your video too. So if you're planning to show us your video, you can do that if you'd like.
There we go. I can see me talk. All right. So real quick, the first rendering is just sort of, you know, what does the future transportation look like? A little bit of solar, a little bit of electric vehicles. And, you know, of course, Minnesota Power has our energy forward strategy through which we are, you know, modernizing our assets and facilities and working towards, you know, providing the safe, reliable energy that, you know, our customers have.
Paul, it looks like we maybe your phone is on mute again somehow, and your slides seem to advance pretty rapidly. So I don't know, maybe you can unmute your phone, or your audio connection isn't on.
Yeah, I'm just holding the space bar on. It seems to do something with the advancement. So, so basically, talking about electric vehicles, you know, what is an electric vehicle? And there's three kind of major areas. You know, all electric vehicles, EVs, battery electric, take no fossil fuel to run them at all, charge completely off of an electric source for mode of energy. In the middle there, the plug-in hybrids, they'll use a combination of a battery with electric drive to go forward, but we'll also have an onboard fossil fuel generator that will supply electric energy to the motors through that generator to extend the range. You know, generally much lower ranges, you know, just in under 30 miles, generally speaking, for plug-in hybrids on full electric. And then, of course, there's the original hybrid electrics, like the Prius that you see here. that we've all come to know. There's no plug-in available for just a straight hybrid. They run fully off of fossils. So you have that, those three types of electric vehicles.
Paul, I just want to mention one more thing, that I think the spacebar in Zoom actually mutes and unmutes you. So it might be different than advancing the slides. You're back on mute again. Sorry, everyone. A couple technical issues that we're dealing with. And if you'd like, Paul, we could switch to Alita and then come back to you for our third speaker as well.
Yeah, why don't we do that? My apologies, and I'll try to just get unmuted so I don't have to hold the space bar down to be muted.
Alita, are you ready to start? We can switch to you and come back to Paul in just a little bit.
I am, yes. Let me share my screen.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Alita Johnson. I'm from the Dulu Transit Authority. I have been here for 16 years now and have taken on the sustainability role in 2009 when we were in the early adopters program for sustainable twin ports. I have a very, very broad presentation today as there we go. There's a lot of, obviously with infrastructure and everything, there's a lot of sustainability practices that we are going through. And I just want to do an overall overview of DTA with our service area. We do service Duluth, Minnesota, Proctor, Hermantown, and Superior, Wisconsin. We currently have 7 electric buses, 6 hybrid buses, 61 diesel buses, and 4 trolleys. Our bus barn houses the 8 slow charge depot charge for our Proterra fleet. And our UZA is 72 square miles, so we are very long for service areas. The infrastructure that I'm going to discuss first will be technology, then fleet and facilities. I'll dip into our service levels as well as a couple of passenger amenities. So with our technology, we are constantly considering virtual versus physical, cloud versus on-premise, and we're constantly looking for the dependency of the internet with redundancy and also security. We have several servers now, all 4 are with us here at the DTA. We implemented paperless shop with barcoding for our maintenance facility. We also have a scheduling and a dispatch software to create efficiencies. We focus a lot on group trips and efficiencies with interlining our services. We have traffic signal priority, which is currently an infrared system, but we are looking for a GPS solution in the near future. This is obviously to increase efficiency as well. We have an application called Vericity, which we use for our electric fleet and our chargers. Soon we are hoping to implement our gas fleet as well as our diesel fleet with this. I do have a slide on this in the presentation. We also have Google Real-Time Feed, which has benefited us in a lot of ways for passenger amenities. A lot of developers as well as internal third-party vendors use this data to survey our routes, to survey our passengers, et cetera, and to give real-time feed to our riders. We have a mobile-friendly website. Hopefully soon, I'm going to hope in this year we will have a mobile-friendly app as well as a future plan for mobile fare payments. We're looking at the Incom network so we can actually get more out into the public's eye and more convenient for purchasing passes or fare sales. Our fleet currently now is a diesel fleet majority. We have the DEF system, which came out in 2016. So we have urea on site and also a hybrid technology. We run the parallel hybrid, so we have the 2 power sources, electrical and mechanical, and that usually shifts around the 15 to 25 mile per hour mark. So it depends on load and engine speed as to when this actually occurs. Our electric bus technology is the Proteras. We purchased them in 2018. Well, we purchased them prior to that. We received them in 2018. And I do have an additional slide on this as well. One small token, we believe, is our retread tires. The front steer tires on the front are always new, but those do become retread tires maybe 2 or 3 times depending on the age, and those will only be rear tires, but they will be a retread, as well as we use nitrogen in our tires. Again, a very large picture to a very small picture, but it does actually help with the rims to be sustainable, as well as it has less pressure change with temperature swings, and we all know we have that here. Our electric bus technology, the system was offered to us because of our topology here. We have the cold weather climate that they wanted to look at, and we use this Veracity software to track all this stuff and give it back to our partners, which is the Center for Transportation and Environment, CTE, Proterra, as well as NREL. We do a monthly report to them from our electric fleet, as well as we cross-compare it with our 2016 diesel fleet, so we can get a overall vision of what is actually working for us. Here's a reporting example. It's a state of charge by temperature. This shows you at 0%, obviously we're using a lot of battery, but at 60s where it really plateaus and evens out, and that's our perfect mark. The problem with Duluth, Minnesota is we don't have many 60-degree days. So when you kick up to 80, you're going to use more AC. When you kick below 60, you're going to use more heat. So this is one example of a report that we use. Our facilities, we have 3 of them. We have our brand new multimodal facility downtown, as well as the old transportation facility. We call that DCE, as well as our bus barn here, DTA at our main location, where we house all of our fleet. We have solar at our downtown transit center, our multimodal center. I do have an additional slide to show you some of that information, as well as we implemented a lot of other people's. Holland, Michigan, for example, has great data on heated sidewalks and the savings on that from chemicals and labor, and we also put in motion sensor lighting for rooms that are not occupied all the time, or our bus barn where we don't have to have the whole entire garage lit. Only when a passenger or a vehicle pulls in that it actually turns on like a Target when you're walking down the aisle. Here's an example of our solar technology at DTC. Our panel faces southwest at 15 degrees. Our highest day, is 260.75 kilowatts, and this is April data. So from the 2017 EIA average, we could have powered 8 houses. Our lowest, unfortunately, is 10.7, so that's pretty much why I have a hybrid system. This, since May 27th of 2016, you can see all of our totals here, our environmental impact. So it's kind of impressive data. It's kind of fun to dive in there and take a peek at it. Our service level, we are a public transportation company. We want to improve air quality, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, save energy. We also run a interlining service. So one run can include 3, 4 different routes. So we never have a vehicle that is laid up. It's by far, we eliminate extended periods of downtime. We don't have to pull buses back in to send them back out. They just start a brand new route and just take off. Our paratransit fleet, we focus on group trips, and we also have larger vehicles to accommodate both ambulatory and wheelchairs, so we can have a pickup system where we can flow to and fro. The software actually tells us what is best for our public and what's best for our properties. Here's just an example. These are my most favorite images that you can Google if you want, where you can see the difference in transit, where 50 pedestrians, 50 cyclists, 50 people on a bus, or 50 people in 33 cars. I mean, that's pretty impressive, and it goes back to the roadway, and it goes back to the emissions, and these are my fun little cartoons that I get to look at all the time. Our passenger amenities, down at DTC, we offer quite a few, the indoor waiting area, next bus signage. We have a parking ramp there. I forgot to add, we also have in our parking ramp electric car chargers. We have ticket vending machines for pass sales. We have a booth for customer service and lost and found. With our parking ramp, we also have the skywalk access to the deck or to downtown. We have Jefferson lines inside the DTC, and Arrowhead Transit and Indian Trails also pick up and drop there. We have bike racks on our buses year-round. As you all know, they like to come down the hill but not go back up, so you definitely can hop the bus and get up the hill to come back down. We also have bike storage in our DTC. We have lighting and heat in some of our shelters. The UPass program has become very, very, very sustainable for us and for them, not having to buy a parking ramp or build a parking ramp, excuse me. And then in the near future, we're hoping to have the next bus stop text in every single bus stop. So all you have to do is text on a phone. It'll give you your next 3 times the buses will be by. COVID-19 has, just wanted to show you how it's impacted us. We've done several service reductions. We've done rear boarding, and we've eliminated fare collections to keep our staff safe. Our staff is on a rotation right now where they're on 4 days on and 3 days off, as well as we have additional cleaning staff for the facilities and for the fleet. So far, March 2019 and 2020, we have 75,000 less riders with 20,000 less miles, almost 21,000 less miles. So the future. Well, we have dug into a BRT. We are looking at on-demand. We're looking at mobility as a service. We've already seen autonomous vehicles at our conferences. Who knows, flying cars. Maybe we're going to take up some airspace right now. We do a TDP every single 5 years. We just completed this 2 years ago, I believe, already. Plus our COA is going out for bid procurement pretty quick here. So that'll be interesting to see where the customer needs are and the travel habits. And that's all I have. I'm a pretty fast talker.
Thank you, Alita. So if we have any quick questions for Alita, we can take them now, or we can transition back to Paul. Again, my apologies for some technical glitches. That's on our end, not on Paul. So don't worry about that, Paul. So any quick questions for Alita, please put them in the chat box. And if not, we will transition back to Paul and then take some longer Q&A at the end. Okay, I'll have one quick question for you, Alita. Is anything being done to increase safety for riders, which may turn into an increase in rider numbers?
Well, on our fleet, we have 8 cameras with 8 different microphones on it already. Our operators are being trained on safety, self-defense, and more things. We have safety meetings all the time to include maintenance and operators. We have a hired police officer on duty as well as our operations supervisors. They are available on the fly. Our dispatch center is very, very well focused on getting the help that any passenger will need or operator will need. And we have a lot of eyes out in the community. So our bus operators now are, reporting things on the street that, technically you don't have to report because it's not on your bus, but protecting the community in that way with 911 calls and everything. So we hope that they're feeling safe. We obviously are going to, in the near future, implement a kind of a Be Safe, Be Seen program where they can text in or submit a form online in the instant so that anything happens and it can be addressed at that time. So that may be a future vision as well for safety.
Excellent. All right, Paul, you're up. I think that we've got it figured out. So take it away.
Yep. Can you hear me now? I don't have to hold my space bar down, which is messing up my advancing.
Yep,
so
we can hear you loud and clear.
Jumping right back in EV charging. I like to think of EV charging as having 3 modes or 3 levels, level 1, 2, and 3. And it's easy to remember the different ones. Level 1 is 120 volts. It's 1. 3 to 5 miles of range for every hour you plug your car into your regular household outlet. So any outlet anywhere, as long as it's grounded, could charge your vehicle. And the cars come with this cable right off the bat. Level 2 is 240. So 2, 240. That's like your household dryer circuit, or a welder or some of those types of appliances, that will require some special wiring, and that'll get you 20 to 30 miles of range for every hour you plug in. You'll find level 2s out in the public space as well. Just like down in Canal Park in Duluth, we have 8 level 2s. And then we also have a level 3 or DC fast charge, which is the next one on that slide. That one is going to get you a really fast charge. It takes 3 phases. So level 3, 3-phase, or more commonly known as DC fast charging. Those will get you 80 to 90 miles of range for a half hour of charging based on the current most popular 50 kilowatt chargers that are out there today. And if you want to find out where you're going to charge your own electric vehicle, you'll get something like this. This is a screenshot of PlugShare, and all the different charging stations will get put on here, and you can filter them based on level 2 or level 3. On this, the green ones are level 2 chargers, and the orange ones are fast chargers. And everyone who gets an EV is going to have one of these apps, so when they're traveling, they know where they can go, and the functionality gets better and better all the time. So what are some of the major drivers of EV uptake in the world? And this is a really big one, I think, is the fact that there are countries all over the world that are literally banning internal combustion engines coming up, in 2030, 2040. And this is a real big indicator to auto manufacturers that you got to change this, and it's also driving that demand. There's headlines all the time about electric vehicles, and the transition in the industry. Recently, Volkswagen announced $38 billion in investments in factories across the world to build electric vehicles, and we haven't even seen the first one released yet from them. And on and on, new different electric vehicles. Tesla, of course, came out with the level 3, which outsold Audi, BMW, and Mercedes in that class of vehicle combined in 2018. So they're really driving the market in the U.S., Tesla. But if you watched the Super Bowl this year, you saw that there were announcements for a Hummer, and you saw the Audi e-tron, and you saw the Porsche Taycan. Many of those are maybe out of our price ranges, but there are also many vehicles coming up that are going to be more and more cost effective. I just sat in on a meeting this morning, and they showed the battery pack and the cost that's just dropping year after year by 18%, 20%, and that'll really drive that cost parity to new vehicles. And what does this mean? It all is a very great opportunity. And we just heard from Alita, the DTA, and they have their Proterra buses, and Minnesota Power, you may have seen our Bolt. But these vehicles are cleaner. They generally cost less to operate. And by 2030, the forecasts are that there'll be nearly 20 million on the road already. And those forecasts change all the time. In addition, and just as a consideration of thought, is, that these vehicles, this technology does require different material uses. And so it's an important aspect to think about that when we as we change our fleets over, what does this mean in that respect? Right now is a really big time for EVs. Of course, with the current pandemic, there's certain investments that are stopping, but if we look at what was going on prior to and what can be expected afterwards, there's a lot of venture capital going into EV startups. 19 billion to EV startups alone in 2019. Tesla took quite a bit of that, still considered a startup. But the new vehicle, there's so many new vehicles entering the marketplace, and that's transforming that embedded capital and infrastructure to build these things in manufacturing. And the next big item, I think, that is really going to help drive EV adoption and expand battery manufacturing capabilities are light-duty trucks, short, long-haul semis, and public transportation. These things will be major drivers of the marketplace. And personal vehicles are already getting there. That'll be the next big items. Technology is improving. We got more and more not building what they call part bin electric vehicles, but really changing to an electric from the ground up. So the adoption of electric chassis like the Rivian or Tesla or others that are building electric vehicles as electric vehicles, that's a big step in for the technology. Battery management systems are creating better range. Heating and cooling technologies in the cabin are helping to drive better efficiencies. And of course, we heard Chris talk a little bit about autonomous or connected and automated, but autonomous is also coming down the road. And Alita also alluded to some of those things. And another thing that we're watching as a utility company, of course, is vehicle to grid, and the technology allowing a parked idle electric vehicle to actually maybe support the grid in various ways. So those are all very exciting technology improvements that are making their way. And then just a little bit of eye candy on some of the different things that are coming down the pike. And like I said, a lot of different vehicles. The Cybertruck in the left-hand corner there, or right-hand corner, and the police vehicle is a Rivian, which has a pickup truck. So big trucks, panel trucks. That Prime vehicle is also on the Rivian chassis, and Amazon invested a significant amount of money, $700 million in Rivian, and ordered 100,000 of these vehicles that will be on the road by 2024. And in the middle is, kind of what do these electric vehicle chassis look like? That's an example of one of these chassis. Put whatever body you want on the top of it. So, so EVs in northeastern Minnesota, one of the big barriers, of course, is where do you charge these things? You see the map, which is a little more sparse. That was the Volkswagen settlement money, the MPCA granted out for DC fast charge corridors in Minnesota. And the one next to it is a rendering of another plan, phase 2 and phase 3, for expanding that DC fast charge network. So by September of this year, the first more sparsely populated map there will be fully built out. That's the deadline, that they should have all those chargers in place. And then going forward, the next couple of years, we'll see more and more of this infrastructure, which just allow people a little more ease from their range anxiety as they look to purchase electric vehicles. And so what is our role as a utility? Well, Minnesota Power right now, if we were on this graph, would be somewhere in the intermediate, maybe entering the late. But we're developing programs, we are engaging with customers, and we are looking to really leverage the opportunities that EVs present. And so we're sort of in that intermediate phase. And there's many reasons why Minnesota Power is interested. Vice president of my area for the company the other day just said in an information share staff meeting, reiterated some of our core values at Minnesota Power, and that he said, the planet, the people, and prosperity. These are the things that drive our core business. Another way of saying that is our safety. Our customers rely on us to supply safe, reliable power, and stewardship is also another one of our core tenets, where we understand we have to take care of our communities, our planet, all at the same time as keeping things safe and reliable. And that's where we strive to move our energy choices. Another reason is greenhouse gas emissions. In 2007, the Next Generation Energy Act set goals. Utilities across the state have met our goals for switching to renewables, 25 by 2025, and we have met that mark already. But greenhouse gas emissions were also in there, and Minnesota is lagging behind. And transportation is the #1 contributor at this point in Minnesota to greenhouse gas emissions. So we see an opportunity with electric vehicles to start to help draw that down as well. And of course, from the business side of things, electric vehicles will equal greater sales, increased demand for our product. So that's very positive. Some of the things we've already done include a commercial rate for charging, and that allows fleets and or public charging stations to get a special break on demand charges that add a lot to the cost of operating infrastructure for public and or fleet. So that is in effect and underway. Right now, we also have been working with site hosts across our service territory, which is pretty vast, to put out level 2 chargers at various site hosts. So from International Falls down to Little Falls, from Duluth over to Sabika, we have 20 different site hosts that will be putting in these electric vehicle charging stations that we're giving them. And then they're smart, so we can monitor them for data for 5 years to watch and see what makes sense as far as locations, those kinds of things. So we're learning more about installing the infrastructure and what it means. We are currently also looking at different incentives for our customers who are buying vehicles, and there'll be more on that coming up in filings in the next few months here. And of course, education outreach is a foundational part of our efforts. Efforts like this to talk with all of you today, just to put it out there that electric vehicles are viable, and they're a good choice, and we're here to support in any way we can. And again, the last thing there is with the Public Utilities Commission, our proposal filings are coming up. So you'll see more from Minnesota Power in this year even for plans to expand infrastructure and options for customers and all that good stuff. In addition, you can take questions, but in addition, if you have questions, I have my colleague, Yusef Forrest. He was hired as our manager for electric vehicle programs, and so his email there as well. But we welcome your feedback and questions, and yeah, that's what I've got.
Thank you so much, Paul. And we do have a few questions for you in the chat box. And if any other questions for our other panelists, folks have them, please type them into the chat box. So one question is, when will we see EV options at car dealers in Duluth?
Right. Great question. And I appreciate that. It has a lot to do with the market demand. And so one thing I tell people is if you're considering an EV, and you can't get it here, you should still go to the dealer and ask for it. Because the dealers need to understand that there is a demand and what that demand is. And so I can't say when dealers will decide to pull the trigger. Some of the barriers they have is they have to train their technicians. They have to buy tools, and they have other things they need to do that require an investment to sell these vehicles. And if they don't see enough cars moving through of that type, they're a little hesitant to take some of those steps, I think, to pull the trigger on supplying those vehicles. Another unfortunate truth is that electric vehicles, and this was reiterated in that other meeting I was in today, will go to where they can be most easily sold. So if we get more demand in Minnesota and it's easier to sell them in the state, we'll see more electric vehicles, and I think therefore dealers will be more likely to want to sell them to us here locally. And that is an area of focus we would like to get at more as well, is how can we work with dealers and encourage them? Great question.
Thanks. Okay, there's another question for you, Paul. What is an average cost to install a level 2 charging station?
Ooh, that's a great question. If you're just installing a charging station, you can buy a really good one for $400 or $500, and installing it, depending on your setup, hire an electrician to wire in a 240 volt circuit can be anywhere from, $400 to $1,000. So it's a little bit of an investment. but definitely, you know, if you need the little bit more charge, faster charge, and going to a level 2, you know, that's kind of where it's at, $1,500 or so.
Great, thanks. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat box. So I would just like to thank our speakers again, Paul, Chris, and Alita, for giving us their time and some very fascinating presentations today. I just want to note that Madison shared a link to the Minnesota Sea Grant webpage in the chat earlier, where you'll be able to find the recording of this presentation in the coming weeks. And a note that when you log off today, you're going to be asked to complete an exit survey. Please fill this out and help our planning team plan our future talks. And then, as Madison mentioned earlier, our next Twin Ports Climate Conversation is going to be on June 16th, same time, noon to 1 p.m. It's also going to be focused on transportation, but this time on non-motorized modes of transportation. And we're finalizing the details for that, and we'll have it out to you very soon. And thanks, everyone, and please take care.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Madison. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, just let me know when the June information is ready to go public, and I will get it posted.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.